And one of the guys, as we were going back and forth in front of the committee of Hilal, he looked me in my eyes and he said, when we were talking about the land of Israel, I spoke to you about yesterday, he said, didn't your God say in the Quran, and he quoted, he says, يا بني إسرائيل اذكروا نعمتي التي أنعمت عليكم وأني فضلتكم على العالمين. He said the whole verse in Arabic. He says, even though his Arabic was broken, he said the whole verse in Arabic. So they are studying us. They are studying our religion. They are studying history. They are getting their facts down, and they are making sure they are on point when it comes to understanding this quote-unquote conflict. Right? We don't like to call it a conflict because it's not equal-sided. Right? But this quote-unquote conflict, they are doing their best in understanding. So for those of you who are here, all I want you guys to do is pay very careful attention, lend an attentive ear, and make sure you guys are, staying on your best and up to par. So when you guys come across these people, you guys are just as ready as they are, or even more ready than they are, right? Even more ready than they are. Nowadays we live in this an era of social media where we're kind of just hyper reactive to anything we see or we come across, and we haven't really read into history or religion, and we kind of just respond back without having, that knowledge that is firm, So make sure you guys pay attention to this class. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate the MSA for setting this up. And before we begin, I also want to introduce Sheikh Kia. He's my main teacher, and he is a gem in the community. He's just mashallah, a light. And this is, along with all the other subjects he's proficient in, he's very, very strong in comparative religion and history. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to elevate him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to elevate his family and grant him steadfastness. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Jazakallah khair, brother Abdullah. That does put your little debate, and that does put things in perspective, and it just kind of also reflects a lot of what I want to talk about, because I'm going to talk about historical Palestine and the kind of asymmetric planning that went into the occupation, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. It's kind of reflective of what he just said, right? Okay. I want to start with a visual. I actually want us to begin thinking about the Holocaust thing. Now you're going to be like, why are we talking, why you want Holocaust, what are we talking about? Just, right? I want you to visualize emancipated, I know we don't want to do this isn't fun, but the visual frames the conversation, okay? Imagine emancipated dead bodies on the side of the road, just neglected. Imagine hundreds of families fleeing, dying of starvation. Imagine families separated. Imagine people being yanked out of their homes. Imagine people being shot in front of their other family members. Imagine people in the hundreds of thousands being killed indiscriminately, women, children. Imagine people being told that, being given a shovel and being told, dig. And they start digging. And the moment that they dig deep enough, they get shot, fall into their own grave, and just left. Okay? Imagine being burned alive. Imagine all of this, and you're like, Dr. Kia, why? Go here to talk about Palestine. Why are you talking about the Holocaust? I am talking about Palestine. Because no one talks about the Palestinian Holocaust. All of the images I just gave you are historically documented, not even by Muslims, by non-Muslims, by Jewish, by Israeli scholars, okay? The stuff that is unclassified. There's plenty more that's classified. Everything I just told you is unclassified, documented material of what Zionists did to Palestinians. From 1917 all the way to 1948. 1950, the Nakba. Okay? Who here, by the way, who here has heard of that term Nakba? I'll go, wait a minute, hold up. Who here is Palestinian? When I say Palestinian, I mean Palestinian origins, okay? If you're born in Jordan, you're Palestinian, you're Palestinian, okay? Okay, so we have some Palestinian, all these people heard of the Nakba, okay? But who here has not heard of the term Nakba? It's okay, raise your hand, we need to know. That's okay? Okay, good. That's what we're gonna talk about, okay? It's the equivalent of the Holocaust. Equivalent. Catastrophe, okay? When you were in elementary school, you learned about the Holocaust. Okay? You might have even taken a school bus trip to the Holocaust Museum. You never learned about the Nakba. Never even heard about it. Unless you're Palestinian or you read about Palestinian history, you've never heard of the term. Okay? You know how in some countries it's illegal to deny the Holocaust? It's illegal. Okay? Well, in Israel, it's illegal to confirm the Nakba. Okay? That's how embarrassing it is for the Israeli Zionists, right? That is the framing from which I want to begin this talk, okay? It is a framing of reframing the imagery, reframing the labeling, okay, of victim and oppressor, right? And there's multiple components to this reframe. This is a holy land. There's a theological component to this, okay? There's a historical component to this. There's a political component to this. One of the reasons why it's so easy to be passionate about Palestine, but not to be proficient in terms of what needs to be done, okay, is because it's hard to bring these components together. The theological, the historical, and the political, they all come together, okay? But that's what we want to talk about in this talk, all right? I'm going to try to keep this until 6:10, all right? If I start to go over, I got to watch. I'm going to keep track. If I start to go over it, then stop me. But I want some time for Q&A before Prophet. I don't know if I'll be able to stay for Prophet. We'll just play it by ear, but that's what we're going to talk about. So let's begin by talking about the theological part. Okay? Yes, but Abdullah mentioned a verse. يا بني إسرائيل اذكر نعمتي التي أنعمت عليكم. O Bani Israel, Surah Baqarah. Remember the favor that I have graced you with. وأني, and that فضلتكم, I have preferred you. By the way, past tense. Past tense. Okay? Well, this is the verse you recite. وَأَنِّي فَضَّلْتُكُمْ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ, and I have preferred you over all other creation. Okay? Yes, we believe that. We have in our own holy book a history of Bani Israel. Okay? And there's a reason why we have that history. This is not a historical kind of recounting as if it's a museum that you go and look at and then say, oh, that's nice. No, no, no. The Quran is concerned with patterns. Allah is teaching us a certain pattern of a community so that we don't repeat the same pattern. Okay? Bani Israel was a chosen community. Right? And this chosen status begins with Ibrahim. Let's understand the biblical kind of perspective first, and then we can go to the Quranic and see how the Quranic confirms in some places, but then corrects in others the biblical narration. Okay? By the way, the Quran is muhaymin. This is one of the terms in the Quran about the Quran. Muhayminun alayh. Muhaymin, okay, means that which overbears, overcomes, corrects, right? That which came before, right? So, in the Bible, when we look at Genesis, this is where it all begins, okay? The claim to right of return. The Zionist claim of right to return, okay? It is a biblical claim. When you look at Genesis, in the Old Testament, there's a supposed conversation between God and Abraham. I believe this is chapter 17 in Genesis, beginning with verse number 8, going all the way to verse number 20 or so. God tells Abraham that he is a chosen person and that the whole land of Canaan is going to be given to him. Okay, what is Canaan? Who knows what Canaan is? What's Canaan?
Wicks.
Which?
Isn't it the ancestral tribe or all of those?
Not a tribe. What is Canaan?
It's no show.
Canaan is a land. Canaan is the land of Sham. Okay, what we would know as Sham. So, Lebanon, Syria, okay, back then there's no borders. These names didn't exist back then, okay? But it's basically this fertile crescent, okay? Palestine, Jordan, Transjordan, all this is Canaan. This is promised to Abraham. Something else is promised to Abraham in the Old Testament. Okay, where? Genesis, right? A covenant is going to be placed into Abraham. Okay, and that covenant is going to go through his offspring. But who are Abraham's offspring? How many children does Abraham have? Who are the children?
This is very good.
Okay, Isaac and Ishmael, or Arabic, Ishaq and Ismail. Okay? Okay, so here's a question. Who gets the covenant after Abraham? Right? And whose progeny gets it? Old Testament says, repeatedly, almost as if it's unnecessarily repeatedly, right? They changed their book. They change it to make it convenient for their own beliefs. Okay? This is something that truly, if you're a Muslim, you have to believe was changed by human hands. God is quoted as telling Abraham, my long everlasting covenant I shall place with Isaac. Ishmael is excluded. Ishmael will be a great nation, but that's a very worldly thing. Numbers. He'll have great numbers. But then it goes back again to Isaac. But the covenant will be with Isaac. Okay? Now, there is, if you're a student in a Christian seminary, you have to take a class called Covenant Theology. Okay? Covenant Theology, right? They have an entire class, many weeks, discussing God's covenant throughout the Bible, right? Because this is very important to them, okay? Jews study this as well, not the New Testament, the Old Testament only, right? Muslims, we have this in the Quran, we don't focus on it, all right? So for this particular verse, that means that Isaac's offspring, and who's the son of Isaac? Jacob, Yaqub. By the way, Yaqub is Israel. Israel is not a land, it's a person. Okay? Israel is mentioned in the Quran as a prophet. Israel is Jacob, same person. Two different names, same person. Okay? Just like Mustafa, Ahmed, Muhammad, same person. Different names. Okay? Yaqub or Israel has 12 children. One of them is Yusuf, you know his story. Okay? These 12 children are the sons of Israel, or Jacob, or in Arabic, Bani Israel. Okay? The children of Israel. Everybody understand so far? According to the Bible, this is where God's covenant is. Alright? Now, we're not going to go through the entire history of Bani Israel throughout the Quran, but covenant theology, important principle we need to understand. All right? Bani Israel does receive God's covenant. They are God's preferred people on earth because they have prophecy. They are taught what La ilaha illallah means. They have La ilaha illallah. وَأَنَا إِسْحَاقُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ وَأَنَا مُوسَى رَسُولُ اللَّهِ وَأَنَا يُوسُف رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. Okay, this is all Islam. All Islam, right? That's why they're the preferred people on earth, because the original message they had was Islam. So long as you maintain and hold on to direct submission to the will of God, you are God's preferred person. That is Islam. Okay? But what does the Quran say they did with this covenant? Over and over and over, they did what? They broke it. Okay? Beginning in Surah Baqarah, we see this over and over again. Right? When Musa alayhi salam brings them out of the desert, brings them out of slavery, out of oppression under Pharaoh, they come out the other side. He splits the sea for them. An amazing miracle, right? They come out the other side. The first thing they do is they see a tribe of people worshiping a god. What do they say? Can we have a god just like they have a god? Moses says, you are an ignorant people. Okay? They continue through the desert. As they wander through the desert, they miss the different spices and varieties of food in Egypt. They tell Moses, we would rather go back and be slaves and have our bellies filled than be with you in this whole covenant thing. They break their covenant again. Right? Moses told them, go to any city, you'll find that. And they lost their dignity and they were debased because of this. They continue. They're in the desert. Moses receives the commandments from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Arba'ina, right? Layla, right? 40 days. What did they do when he does this? They take all their jewelry, all their gold, they melt it, they make a golden calf, they start worshiping a golden calf. Harun tries to stop them, Harun being the brother of Musa alayhi salam, also a prophet, and they almost kill Harun. We'll never leave this golden calf until Moses comes back. They break the covenant again. They were told not to violate the Sabbath. They broke the Sabbath. They broke the covenant again. Okay? They were told not to take gods other than Allah. They kept doing that over and over and over again. Eventually, they enter into Palestine. And Allah tells them in the Quran, you need to know this verse because these guys from Hilal will bring this one up too. Enter the holy land that I have written for you. This is a command that God gives to Moses with Bani Israel. Enter into the holy land, what? That I wrote for you. You're going to talk to one of these people, one of these Zionist fundamentalists, and they're going to say, did God not say that this land was written for us? You need to understand covenant theology. Okay? Yes. They were told to enter the land. By the way, they were told to enter the land sujada, prostrating out of humility. They refused. Broke their covenant again. Broke their commandment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again. As they enter into the Holy Land, they defeat the Canaanites. They're called Canaanites because the land was called what? Canaan. Okay? And they begin to try to establish God's law. They begin to try to establish a temple, right? Of course, you know the story of David defeating Goliath. In the Quran, Dawood defeating Jalut, who's the son of Dawood. Sulaiman builds a temple. Builds a temple. Yeah. They have with them the Ark of the Covenant. Okay? It comes back to them, but they initially lost it because they kept falling into polytheism and different tribes would defeat them. The Bible has a section called the section of Judges. It's all about this. They keep breaking their covenant over and over again. After Sulaiman, okay, they fall into polytheism again. In fact, the northern tribes fall into worship of a very historically famous idol called Baal. Anybody heard of this? B-A-A-L? Anybody heard of like Baal? Like cults and stuff like this still exist today. It's this mythological figure that kind of has like horns, kind of looks like a cow. From the beginning, Bani Israel had something with cows. Yeah. No, seriously, right? They worshipped a golden calf. When Moses went, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them to slaughter a cow, they wouldn't do it. They had some kind of weird attachment. And actually in Egypt, when you look at hieroglyphics, old Egyptian hieroglyphics, there were many different gods, but one of them was a half cow, half god, half human god, right? From their time of being slaves with Pharaoh, they were immersed in this kind of like cow worship, right? Baal was like this half human, half like, type like cow-like figure, okay, with horns, right? And these northern tribes, they fell into, this is right after Sulaiman, they fell into worship of Baal. The Quran talks about this. There's a verse in the Quran, أَتَدَعُونَ بَعْلًا. Who here's talk in the Quran? Somebody here's talk. Here, heard of this verse. أَتَدَعُونَ بَعْلًا وَتَدَرُونَ أَحْسَنَ الْخَالِقِينَ. Okay? Are you going to worship Baal and leave the best for prayers, right? The northern tribes are completely destroyed by the Assyrians. They keep breaking their covenant over and over again. Eventually, Allah punishes them. The Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, about 500 years before Jesus, comes and completely destroys the temple that Suleiman built. This is 500 years before Jesus, right? Why does God allow this to happen, right? You could argue in the Quran and in the Bible, because they kept breaking the covenant. The covenant theology, right? The land is connected to the covenant. It is very important, right? But they keep getting chances over and over again. So they go into exile. They become refugees. Many of them go into the different lands around pre-modern Palestine. Many of them go to Persia. Cyrus the Great allows them to go back. They go back. About 100 years later, they rebuild their temple. Okay? They no longer have their Ark of the Covenant, right? So that's symbolic right there. From this point on, they no longer have their Ark of the Covenant. They used to have an Ark of a Covenant. So this Ark, it's talked about extensively in Exodus, in the Old Testament. It's like this wooden and gold chamber. This wooden and gold chamber, okay, that contained the tablets that Moses received from God, okay? And it contained some remnants of the possessions that Moses had. They would take this around them everywhere they went, and when they had first entered into the land and everything, and they lost this Ark of the Covenant, right? After they went back to rebuild the second temple. But after some time, again, they fall into polytheism. They break their covenant again. The Macedonians, 300 years before Jesus, come and take over Jerusalem. It becomes a very Hellenistic place. They fight back. They gain some land back. But then what happens? Well, a few years before the coming of Jesus, a couple decades before that, the Romans come. All right? And they take the land. Actually, more than a few decades, much more than that. Anyway, the Romans come, they take the land. It's now fully a vassal of Jerusalem is a vassal of the Roman state. And Beni Israel at this time, they are really hot for their Messiah. Okay, there's a lot of quote-unquote zealotry going on. Okay, a lot of what would now be called terrorist acts, right? Jewish militias attacking the occupying forces of the Romans, because it's their land, right? So they would kill Pharisee and Sadducee appointed leaders for their temple that were appointed by the Roman government. They would kill Roman soldiers. They would do ambushes, okay? And these were just labeled as terrorists. These are just terrorists, and we're trying to keep the peace. The Romans, we're trying to keep the peace, so you guys keep causing trouble. What does that sound like? What does that sound like? Roman period. They keep, but they're like, so all these people come up and each one claims to be a Messiah. We don't need to go into that history. By the way, Reza Aslan's book on Jesus is actually, even though his aqidah is not correct about what happened with the crucifixion, his historical narrating of what happened is actually very, very good. Okay, and it's very palpable to read as well, because sometimes you read history, it's very stale, but he writes it in a very good way. So, this is what happens, right? And God sends them a Messiah. Who's the Messiah? Who's the Messiah that comes at this time? Jesus Isa, okay? And the Messiah is supposed to establish God's kingdom on earth, defeat the enemies of the Jews, and establish God's kingdom on earth. And what did they do with Jesus? We see Jesus was not who they thought the Messiah would be. The temple at this time, the rebuilt temple that was originally destroyed, okay, by the Babylonian, it became a place of corruption. Money changers would just make money up, because here, you would go to the temple, you had to use temple money. So there's rituals, there's sacrifices, there's all kinds of things you had to do, incest and everything. You couldn't use the Roman currency because it had pagan gods on it. So when you went to the temple, you had to switch the Roman currency for a shekel, okay? And this shekel was acceptable to be used in the temple, okay? But then the Sadducees and the Pharisees and all these people who were running the temple, they would charge you a profit to change your money. And if you didn't have money, they would take a loan, and the loan would have a huge amount of interest on. And basically the temple actually turned into a bank. And all these weak Israelites who lived in and around Jerusalem that were poor, and all they wanted to do was go to the temple and worship God, they were suffering. Jesus comes and criticizes all this. And so on the one hand, the Jewish leaders, the Sadducees, the Pharisees at the time, they didn't like Jesus because it meant they were going to fall from power. It's like the Meccan aristocrats feeling threatened by Muhammad because they're about to lose their position if everyone follows this man, right? And Jesus is doing all these miracles and basically making them obsolete, right? On the other hand, Jesus is claiming that he's going to establish the kingdom of God, but there's only one king, hence the Roman Empire. So then that's a political threat. So the Jews and the Romans conspire together to try to kill him. And the Jews are complicit in this. They tried, but they didn't. Of course, the crucifixion story is a different story. I'm not going to get into that. But the point is this. This was their Messiah. They tried to kill him. Not only that, what did they say about the mother of Jesus? They said that she committed adultery. And they essentially assassinated her character. They tried to physically assassinate Jesus. They tried to morally assassinate her mother. They broke their covenant for the final time. 70 years after Jesus, literally 3 decades, 3 to 4 decades after Allah takes them from this earth, the Romans come in and do what with the temple? Completely raze it to the ground and kill essentially all the Jews that are there. From henceforth, there is no covenant with Bani Israel. Okay? Now, covenant theology. When a land is promised to you as a people, as a part of God's covenant, okay, you can't keep the covenant because you keep falling into stubbornness and arrogance over and over and over again. Guess what? You lose the land. If you have a job, just think about this very simply, okay? If you have a job, and then the job, you get hired, you have a job to be whatever, IT, okay? Everyone's in IT. You got an IT job, okay? And the job comes with benefits, healthcare benefits, gym membership benefits, okay? And then you basically, you don't do your job. You don't show up to work. You're incompetent. You don't know anything about IT. One day your boss comes to you and say, listen, I'm sorry, it's over. You're fired, okay? You're like, and then you think to yourself, you know what? I think I still work. Whatever. I'm still unemployed. You go to the gym. You're like, hey, I have a gym membership card, but your card doesn't qualify. You're like, why doesn't my card work? Because it was a part of the job. You lost your benefits. We go back to this land, okay? The land was a part of being on God's covenant between God and Abraham. In the Quran in Surah Baqarah, Allah says, إِنِّي جَعِلُكَ لِلنَّاسِ إِمَامًا. I'm going to make you an imam for all of mankind. In this is implicit the idea of a covenant, right? Then, what is Ibrahim's question? وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي. What about my children? Okay, he's got 2 children, Ibrahim and Ishaq. Right? I'm sorry, Ismail and Ishaq. Here the Quran does not say it only stays with Ishaq forever and ever, and Ishmael is going to be a great nation, or it only stays with Ishmael forever and ever. Ishaq will be a great nation. No. The Quran says, لا ينال عهد الظالمين. My covenant will never be retained by people who are oppressors and wrongdoers. You see, the Quran has a very different approach to this. It is conditional upon being righteous servants of God. Once you become an oppressor and a wrongdoer, you lose your covenant. So what happens? Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is born. And who is he from? Ishaq or Ismail? Ismail. And where are all the Jews at this? They're in Medina. Why are they in Medina? Why is Banu Qaynuqa, Banu Nadir, all these Jewish tribes, right? Why are they in Medina? Because in their books they know a prophet's going to arise. Except they didn't think it would be from the Arabs, because that's Bani Ismail. So when they saw it's from Bani Ismail, they immediately rejected him, because what does that mean? The covenant has shifted. It's no longer in the children of Israel, now it's in the children of Ishmael. Wait a minute, what does that mean about us? We're no longer God's chosen people. So the Jews of Medina fought this tooth and nail. Because they know what it means. It also means that land is no longer theirs. You see the theological implications. Okay, what happens when the Prophet makes migration to Medina? What happens to the Qibla? From what to what? It changes from what to what? From Jerusalem to Kaaba. Okay, who built the temple in Jerusalem? Sulaiman from the children of Isaac. Who built the temple in Mecca? Ishmael and Ibrahim. What does that represent? The change in direction of prayer represents what? The shift in covenant. That temple is gone. This temple, when Abraha tried to destroy it, Allah sent birds with stones and protected it. This covenant is still going. Then what happens in the Isra? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is taken from Mecca to where? Where? Bayt al-Maqdis, Jerusalem, which is where the old covenant. And what does he do there? He leads all the prophets of Bani Israel in prayer. And then rises up in Mi'raj and receives the prayer himself of 50 prayers a day, which then becomes 5 prayers a day. And this solidifies the new covenant with the Ummah of Islam. So, the first thing we need to understand, okay, theologically speaking, is the covenant shift. Bani Israel was a preferred people. Bani Israel was told to enter into a land. Bani Israel did have God's covenant, but when you show up to work late over and over again, when you show incompetence over and over again, eventually you get fired. And someone takes your place, and you lose the benefits. Bani Israel lost their land. Okay? Now let's fast forward. Now we need the political and historical context. The land of Palestine will switch hands. You know, during the time of Omar, the second Khalifa, it falls into the hands of Muslims. Very soon after the Prophet Muhammad. Literally, Abu Bakr rules for 2 years, then Omar rules, and then very soon into his rule, the Muslims peacefully take Palestine in Jerusalem, okay? And it will stay in Muslim hands for a while, and every time
Jerusalem was ruled by Muslims, you had nothing but peace. Nothing but peace. And whatever Jewish, Christian minority lived there, they lived in peace. Fast forward a couple centuries, the Catholic Church is going bankrupt. The Pope announces crusade really to raise money. Jerusalem is going to switch hands between Catholics and Muslims. Catholics and Muslims. Okay? Until finally, let's fast forward until the 1500s. It falls under Ottoman rule. Okay? And from 1517 to 1917, Ottomans ruled Palestine. Okay? There was no more than a few thousand Jews in Palestine at that time. Okay? They own approximately 3% of the land. How much? 3%. If you want to be very liberal, 5%. Okay? Of course, there's always historical differences in these numbers, but no more than 3 to 5% of the land. But they lived in peace, and they lived in dignity. There was never any issues. In fact, you were likely not to know who a Jew was, or who a Christian was, or who a Muslim was. If you were to look at Palestine in 1781, okay? Because they all just lived in peace, right? Of course, Muslims were the majority, but something happens in 1917, okay? What happens in 1917? World War I comes to an end. And what side were the Ottomans on? The wrong side. Right? And Palestine falls to the British. And this is the beginning of all the issues. Okay? Palestine becomes a British mandate. The British claim to be a neutral power. Okay? They're going to be a neutral power, but they're anything but neutral. Right? Immediately, they start bringing in Jews from Europe. Okay? The Holocaust still hasn't happened. Okay? But this is the beginning of the Palestinian Holocaust. They start bringing in Jews from all over Europe. Now, let me ask you a question. Why do you think the British were doing this? Do you think that somehow the British, they're such good people. They were like, these poor Jews all over Europe, we have to give them a land. Was that their motivation? What do you think their motivation was?
To get them out of their land.
To get rid of them!
Yeah, to get rid of them.
There was so much anti-Semitism amongst the British. They're like, we can't stand the Jews. Okay? We're going to find a place to put them. In fact, do you know early migrations, European migrations to America, the people who were first to migrate were not the rich people. They were the poorest people of Europe. These were people put on boats by the Europeans and said, like you would smack someone and say, get out of here, right? And they literally pushed them to America, okay? The most uneducated, incapable people were coming to America in the 1700s at first, right? Because Europe was trying to get rid of them, right? Same thing with the Jews. By the way, I want to make a disclaimer here. I am primarily talking about Zionists. I am not talking about Judaism. Okay? This is a very important distinction, right? You don't even have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. There are many Christian Zionists. There are many atheist Zionists. Zionism is a very secular political movement. It has potentially some theological implications, and it can be used by religious Jews. But ultimately, okay, anyone can be a Zionist, just like anyone can be a communist. Okay, so if there happens to be a lot of Christians who become, you're not talking about Christianity. Okay, you're talking about communism, right? I'm talking about Zionism. Okay, I don't want this to be equated with Jews, because there's actually many Orthodox Jews against Zionism. Many Orthodox Jews against Zionism. They believe we can't just be claiming a land for ourselves. We have to wait for the Messiah. Okay, that's actually what they believe. We can't do anything until the Messiah comes. So we have to stay in exile until the Messiah. That's what Orthodox Jews believe. A lot of them are very much against Zionism. Okay? So the British, they start bringing in thousands and thousands of Jews. During the 30-year mandate that Britain had over Palestine, they brought in a few 100,000 Jews into Palestine. Okay? And from the get-go, they claimed what their intentions was. The Prime Minister of Britain at that time, 1917, Arthur Balfour, okay, wrote a letter of declaration to a very prominent Jew. Okay, his name was what's his name? Walter. Huh? No. Theodore Herzl's the brainchild of Zionism. I'll talk about him in a second. But Rothschild, this guy, the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, Arthur Balfour, he writes a letter to Walter Rothschild. Walter, you might have heard this name Rothschild, you probably heard of it, okay? It's a very, till now, it's a very famous, wealthy Jewish family name. And Walter Rothschild was a very noble, wealthy Jew, okay, who had bought into the writings of Theodore Herzl. Theodore Herzl, okay, in the late 1800s came up with the idea of Zionism. That us Jews, we can't live in Europe. Everybody hates us. We have to have our own land, okay? And in fact, in the late 1800s, okay, there were Zionist councils and conferences set up, and they had rabbis go to Palestine and to assess the land and say, is this possible? Can we take back the land, right, that was talked about in the Old Testament? And the rabbis would come back and say, what? The bride is beautiful, but she's married to another man. The bride is beautiful, but she's married to another. What does that mean? The land is beautiful, but it already has people on it. Okay? People already living there. Okay? But the ideas of Zionism persisted, and when the British took over in 1917, Arthur Balfour wrote this declaration, it became the Balfour Declaration, to essentially a very prominent Jew, okay, telling him that this Rothschild guy, we are going to make Palestine a Jewish state, the British. From that time, they kept bringing Jews in. Now, eventually, Palestinians, miskin, farmers, okay, simple lives. They work the land. They pick orange trees. They have date trees. They have olive trees. They have the most beautiful land, and they work the land, and that's all they're concerned with. And they had a very simple life like the Ottomans. They're not trained as fighters. They're not trained as warriors. Okay? Miskin, they don't even know what's happening. There's no social media at this time. You can't just check your phone to see what's happening over in Haifa, okay, or Tiberias. You can't just check your phone to see what's happening in Deir Yassin, right? You have no idea. Just the village over, you have no idea what's happening. News might not get you for 2 weeks. But from the get-go, the Zionists that are brought in begin to plan on how they're going to take all of the land. They have councils. They have get-togethers. From the 1920s, right away they established the Jewish Jewish land fund, okay? And this was to raise money. Wealthy people like Rothschild, they would raise money for any Jew who came into Palestine. This is the 1920s. To give them money to buy land, okay? And they did buy some land, but nothing compared to the violence that's coming later to drive people out, okay? But this money was raised for them, right? And they would buy some land, and they would take advantage of the hospitality of the Arabs because by nature, Palestinians, very generous people. If they have nothing, they'll find something to give you dinner with, right? Very generous. So they had the best assumptions, a lot of them. Early on, they had no idea what's going on, okay? But once the numbers hit a critical mass, and the Palestinians saw that actually the Brits are training these Jews. They're training them in their colonial tactics. They're training them in warfare. They're training them in how to fight. They begin to rebel. And in 1929 is the first Palestinian rebellion. Okay? Now this rebellion, it didn't go far. All the Arab states at this time, okay, they're all just being formed. Okay? post World War I, lines are being drawn. They're just kind of like forming their own independent Syria, Lebanon, all. They're not that concerned. And by the way, you don't have journalists with like, Al Jazeera 24/7 live streaming to know what's going on. It's hard to know what's going on in another part of the world at this time, in the 1920s, 1930s, okay? But they established this Jewish National Fund to buy up land. They established a settlement department. It's run by a guy named Yusuf Weitz. This guy is like Haman, the right-hand person of Pharaoh. This guy, okay, what he would do is he would make sure all the land that's being bought up by Jews, if there are Palestinians renting homes from other Palestinian landlords who happen to not be there, because a lot of times the landlords are not there. They live in another part of Palestine at a different part of the year. They travel, they go back and forth, okay? If the landlord is not there, they would go to the tenants, okay? And they would say, we have bought this land, get out. And they would kick them out by force, okay? This is called the settlement department, and it was formed. This is all historical evidence. In fact, don't take my word for it. Go read a book by a person called Ilian Pape, a Jewish Israeli historian, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Ilian Pape, okay? This is not even stuff that is like claimed by Muslims or denied by, no. This is all declassified material. Most of it's still classified in Israeli archives, and we have no idea, okay? But this is how it started, okay? Not only that, the settlement department in the Jewish National Fund, they went and they made a demographic survey of all of Palestine. They went to see, I'm gonna go like 10 minutes over. They went to see where all the best land was, where all the best farms were, who had the best orchards, who had, literally to this detail, there are diaries of David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, to talk about this stuff. How many oranges are growing on this tree? This particular farmer, how fertile is his land? In Haifa, what's the land like? In Deir Yassin, what's the land like? Okay, they documented all of this. And more and more and more started coming in. Okay, in 1956, the Palestinians, they had a little bit more of an organized, systemic revolt. Okay, actually, they all went on strike as well. They wanted to target the economic situation, and the British were having none of this. Okay, they are a lot of intelligence, and they're forming their own secret service, the Haganah. The Haganah is eventually going to become the IDF of today, Israeli Defense Force. Okay, there's actually a couple branches of the Haganah. There's something called the Stern Gang, and this is the equivalent of like ISIS. Okay, like they just do nothing but violence. They don't care about anything. All they want to do is kick people out. And there's another branch of the Haganah called the Urgan. Okay, they're all just malicious Zionists. Okay, and they're gathering intelligence. In fact, all the people who revolted against the British, they went and wrote all of their names down for later. For later. Okay, and in the late 1930s, early 1940s, okay, many of the Jews, they begin to attack the Palestinians. And they begin to use tactics of intimidation. It's not just to kill them, it's to scare them, okay, to kick them out of their land, okay? So there would be bombings, there would be gunfire, some villages would be razed to the ground with fire, okay? And at first, it was to drive them out. At some point, the British, they're like, hey, you can't do this. Okay, like, calm down. But for the most part, they would just stand by and watch. Okay? But even the British, who were heavily Zionist favored, at some point, they started saying, listen, you can't just, like, randomly kill people. And that's what they would do. Okay? Those scenes that I gave you at the beginning, that's all stuff that the British and the Haganah, okay, would do to the Palestinian Muslims. And not just Muslims, Christians as well. In fact, there's a story, this was in I remember reading about this story, 1947, 1948, of a famous priest in Tiberias. who had a parish, a church with him, okay? And he had a lot of followers. And the British came to him and said, you have to leave. You know that this land is for the Jews and they're coming, they're going to take it. And that pastor told him that's a misinterpretation of the Bible, okay? I disagree with that. The British forcefully took him, and Tiberias was an important place for Christians. Remember in the Old Testament when Jesus miraculously feeds 5,000 people with a few loaves of bread and 2 fish. These people from Tiberias came to see who this amazing person was, right? And so that's recorded in the New Testament. And so it's an important place for Christians as well. And so, the British officer said, if you don't leave, we're going to take you by force. This is a Palestinian Christian. He said, this is my land. I'm staying here. I'm not going anywhere. They dragged him out of the church. They took his son. They took his daughter. His wife was in a hospital sick. They took her out of the hospital. And took them out, drove them somewhere completely different, and allowed the Zionists to come and take that, turned it into whatever they turned synagogue and whatnot. This wasn't just happening to Muslims, to Christians as well. Palestinian Christians, one of the greatest advocates for Palestine in the 21st century was Edward Said. Anybody heard of this person? Palestinian Christian intellectual. He wrote the book Orientalism. Okay? A must read. An absolute must read. Okay? So it's not just Muslims, but they're gathering intelligence, and then at some point they realized, you know what, our biggest obstacle is not the Palestinians. These Syrians and Lebanese, and they'll just give them a few weapons here and there, but for the most part, they have no idea what's going on. They're not really supporting them, and the Palestinians have no training. Okay, they'll go buy a gun, they'll go buy a few bullets, and they'll try to practice, and then they'll run out of bullets, and then it's like, okay, now we have to go to... They have no idea. There's just no one to train them. The British are training. The Haganah, they're training Jews. Not only that, many Jews enlisted with the British for World War II, and they got a lot of fighting experience. They understood how to use artillery. They learned how to fly planes. Palestinians, miskeen, they're just trying to till the land. Nobody's helping them with anything. But the Haganah and the Urgun and the Stern Gang and these Jewish militias, they carry out 500 bombings against the British in 1946, 1947. Because they want the British to leave now. Look how crazy it is. At first the British is helping them. Now they're like, just get out. We want the whole land. Okay? So they start bombing the British. The King David Hotel was where the British in Jerusalem, they had their headquarters. They bombed that hotel. 90 people died. What would you call that today? Terrorist act? Okay? They bombed Palestinian homes and villages. But 500 bombings were recorded. 500. Nowadays you turn on CNN and you're like, oh, there's a bomb went off in Israel. Suicide bomb. Terrorists. They were doing this non-stop against the British. Finally, the British are like, we've had enough. We have to leave. Okay? We have to give this. We have to give this situation to the UN. Okay? We can't take it anymore. Right? There's a lot of lobbying going on with the UN as well. Okay? And at this time, the Jews own no more than 10% of the land. The issue goes before the UN, and in 1948, the UN decides that they're going to partition the land. And they partition the land such that 56% of the land is given to the Zionists. And not just land, the best parts of Palestine, the most fertile parts of the land. And 44% or so is given to the Palestinians. Okay? Just think about what this means. In the 56% of the land that the UN arbitrarily gave to the Zionists, you had 1 million Palestinians living there. 1 million. And 400,000 Zionists. According to Zionism, okay, and according to the Zionist doctrine of tihur, which is the Hebrew word that's equivalent to tuhur, which means purification, purifying the land from Arabs, you had to rid the land of Arabs. So these 1 million Arabs that are living amongst 400,000 Zion, what's going to happen to these Arabs? What's going to happen to these Muslims? They're going to be ethnically cleansed. That's the only way you can truly have a Zionist state. Okay? So the situation becomes terrible. David Ben-Gurion, who was a part of the original Haganah, becomes the first prime minister, and he has this policy of violence and opportunity. Okay? Every time there's an opportunity, we're going to use violence to drive people out of their homes, and they did this. Okay? There are countless villages, over 400 villages, where the Zionists went in, bombed the homes, pulled the people out, shot them in front of their families, raped the women, documented, burned people alive, buried them, made them dig their own graves, buried them, okay? Or forcibly made them to leave. 400 villages, over 1 million Palestinians, okay? When the British leave in 1948, such a huge vacuum is created. The Zionists, up until this time, I told you, they did a survey of the land, they did a survey of all the Palestinians, they knew everything about their leadership. The minute they left, it was no longer violence, it was just violence. Okay? Village after village were stormed with one goal in mind: scare them, make them leave, or kill them right there and bury them. That's it. Okay? And so you had 1 million Palestinians becoming displaced. Many of them went to Jordan, many of them went to Syria, many of them went to Lebanon, okay? Many of them became internal refugees. Some of them would go, for example, if you fled to Bethlehem, okay, they didn't want to upset the Pope. And there were some tension about, for example, like Bethlehem, okay? So they wouldn't do too much. So you might still find Palestinians there today. They became internal refugees. Okay? Very few Palestinians live in Israel today, right? But many of these people, their land would still be taken from them. Okay? All that they would pass laws where if you weren't there for 3 years, you gave up your land automatically. Okay? But if you tried to come back and you were Palestinian, the army would say you can't come back because we're doing training here. And it would be 3 years, and they would take the land, and so the Palestinian would go to court and be like, the army didn't let me come back. And the judge would be like, okay, take it up with the army. It's not my issue. There's nothing you could do. There's nothing you could do. They would lose land either through killing, or through intimidation, or being driven out, or through laws that were systematically unfair. Okay? And so what happens is, in a period of 2 years, 1947, 1948, 1949, 1 million Palestinians are killed, ethnically cleansed, an entire genocide takes place. Okay? Entire genocide takes place. They are forced into different places. Many of them, there's documentation of these refugee camps that were set up in the 50s on the border of Syria. They're still there. The refugee camps are still there. Okay? And there was one person, I'm forgetting his name. I wrote it down because I knew I was going to forget it because he has a Swedish name. And, so the UN appointed Folk Bernadotte, a Swedish nobleman. Remember this name. Folk Bernadotte, okay? And this guy saved 31,000 Jews from the Holocaust. Okay? He was a nobleman. He was a diplomat. He went and negotiated, got 31,000 saved from the concentration camps and whatever. He went to help the Palestinian refugees. He saw how bad the situation was. He wrote a report to the UN and he said, you have to let these people back. This is genocide. It's a catastrophe. They have to go back to their land. He wrote that report to the UN. The next day, the Urgun, which was a branch of the Haganah, assassinated him in Jerusalem. And his request was rejected. Anyone who went to look at the situation realized how bad it was. Even Jimmy Carter was so pro-Zionist in the 70s and 80s. He went and visited in the early 2000s, 90s. He came back and wrote a book. He actually visited Palestinians instead of just visiting Zion. You know what the name of the book is? You know what Jimmy Carter has a book called Peace, Not Apartheid. He said, this Zionist state is apartheid. It is nothing but apartheid. And so, at that time, the British leave, the UN recognize Israel, they go ahead, they take some more land. By 1950, they have 80% of the land. 80%. And the best land. 20% is with the Palestinians. Now, from that point on, there's some wars that happen. 1967, 1973, Oslo Accords. They take more land. Some of it they give back. But for the most part, the Jordanians in the late 1940s, they had the best army amongst all Arabs. They actually negotiated to annex the West Bank. And it was under their control, initially. But then they lost control. It fell under, Palestinian control. But that's why the West Bank, okay, some of it is still under Palestinian control. After the 70s, 80s, they just kept taking it like Swiss cheese and chopping it up, okay? But Palestinians were driven, many of them driven to the Gaza Strip, okay? And that's why you have 2 million Palestinians living in a small strip of land like this. And because the Jordanians had annexed the West Bank, many of them found refuge in the West Bank. And that's why Palestinians live in those two places today. But after 1950, the Israeli government made an armistice with Syria, Jordan, all these other countries to not allow the Palestinians back in. So it was like they got out, but they can't get back in. And Israel, till now, will not allow anyone to go back. Okay, there's no right of return if you're a Palestinian. So we have, from 1917 till now, a very slow, methodical process of genocide and ethnic cleansing, okay? Which was accelerated for 2 years, in 1947 and 1948, and that's what is referred to as the Nakba, the catastrophe. 1 million Palestinians at that time were killed, expelled, ethnically cleansed, etc., etc. But from 1917 till now, do you know how many Palestinians have been displaced? Take a guess. 1917 till now, how many Palestinians are displaced? 6 million. Let's go back to the Holocaust. How many Jews were you taught were killed in the Holocaust? 6 million? Okay, by the way, there's a lot of debate about the number. The Holocaust happened, no doubt about that. But maybe not 6 million, maybe 3 million, maybe 1 million, maybe 600,000. There's all kinds of different numbers that historians talk about, okay? Israel would have you believe 6 million because it creates the most sympathy for you. But how ironic is it that in 1944 a Holocaust happens, a people go through tremendous suffering. You would think that these people, more than anyone else, would have sympathy and empathy to not allow this happen to anyone ever again, yet the very people who underwent this trauma turn around and do 10 times worse on Palestinians, and the world just looks on. Why? Is it because they're white and they're brown? Is it because they look more European and they look more African? Is it because they seem more westernized and these people seem less westernized? What is it? Is it racism? Do all human lives not matter? Do Palestinian lives not matter? So this just drives you, it's just so frustrating. It's like a child who went through trauma, and instead of there being something good in them, and they grow up and say, I'm never going to allow this to happen to my child. I'm never going to allow any child to go through this trauma again. I'm going to set up an institute, I'm going to set up an organization, a charity. But instead, they just become an even worse child abuser. They just become an even worser abuser, right? What can we do? Well, there's a lot of things you can do. People always talk about dua, and I'm a firm believer in dua, in your relationship with Allah, and you rectifying your own relationship with Allah is always the beginning of making any change, because Allah says in the Quran, Allah God does not change the condition of the people unless they first change their own condition. Of course it begins with that. But that's where it begins, it's not where it ends. Okay? I was talking with Brother Ali before we came. Brother Ali is going into film production. You see, this is also something else we can do. We have a lot of Muslims who want to be doctors, engineers, lawyers, and that's great. But capturing the social imaginary of the American public is not going to happen with a stethoscope, okay, and a ruler, okay? It's not going to happen like that. It's going to happen through movies. It's going to happen through documentaries. It's going to happen through podcasts. It's going to happen through impacting culture, video games. What if you had a video game of a hero character who's liberating Palestine? I mean, what? Just, I mean, you have, what's that famous shooter game everyone plays? What's it? Call of Duty. Isn't there a version of that where they're like killing Muslims in the Middle East or something like that? Isn't there a version of that? I know there's a version where they're like killing people in South America or something like that. There's a version where they're like killing Muslims. How many video games have you seen of a Muslim liberating their land? But what does it do? What does it do to your understanding of Middle Easterners when you play a video game and you get points for shooting them? It dehumanizes them. And by the way, that is the genocidal de facto policy. Dehumanize them as much as you can. A land for a people. Wait, how's it go? A land without a people for a people without a land. There's already people there, but you say there's no one there. It's like dehumanizing them. The prime ministers of Israel, they refer to Palestinians as rats. Rats just scattering. This, you dehumanize them, right? What can you do in the media to humanize Palestinians? There are sanctioning movements, BDS, okay? Those are also really important, okay? Politics, right? Activism, not activism where you just like, all you're doing is, you're not spiritually centered at all. You're just, everyone who's raving a Palestinian flag, you're just joining it. No. Like intelligent spiritual activism. Centering yourself spiritually and then using that, okay, that energy to understand, okay, now how do I change society? Right? There's plenty of things we can do. What we need to do right now is educate the public. So whatever information you've taken from this talk, take it, teach people, inform them, let them know about the genocide. Let them know about the Palestinian Holocaust. That's where it begins. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله فاستغفروه إنه كان غفارا. Can we do any discussion, questions, comments? 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or we're gonna wrap it up.
Yeah, we can.
Anybody have a question, comment? Yes.
So I heard that like for Jews, right, like their kind of code of behavior, kind of like how we have like, okay, this is how you treat people, this is how you whatever. I heard it's only applicable to other Jews, as in like, okay, like you like don't steal from a Jew, don't whatever from a Jew, but you can do that stuff to anyone else.
Some of them will make that interpretation, but not Orthodox Jews.
Yeah.
So Zionists will, and they'll say you can take interest from a non-Jew, and you can do these things, and we're all just here for them. And they're God's chosen people, so you can do these things. But my understanding is that Orthodox Jews will not do that. But Zionists will. Yeah.
So a really famous tactic right now, or a media tactic that's going on right now, is that Israel is somehow able to justify their actions by blaming it on Hamas, right? Like, oh, this hospital we had, there's Hamas, so that's why we bombed it. Or this school, this orphanage had Hamas in it, so we bombed it.
Right.
What is the best way that we can somehow change that narrative and having people trying to begin to understand the fact that you cannot, that doesn't make sense?
Okay, so that's a great question. And basically, it's like, people, they start, will you condemn Hamas? Will you condemn Hamas? And that's also part of it. You have to historically contextualize the situation. Give them a metaphor to understand. Say, listen, how would you like it if How would you like it if the Prime Minister of Canada, okay, told the President of Mexico, Mexicans have been trying to come into this country, right? And they keep coming into this country, right? Okay. What if the Prime Minister of Canada told the President of Mexico, I'm going to give you America as your land? And how would you feel as an American? And the Mexicans feel very emboldened. Okay, nothing against the Mexicans, okay? But just the metaphor, okay? And Mexicans come, and it might hit them in the heart because a lot of these people are right-wing and they don't like immigration, but these Mexicans come and they take your home. Say it was promised to us. You don't accept it, so they take you out. And they force you out. Maybe they kill you. Maybe they blow up your home and build a new home. Or maybe they do this, and here's a better metaphor for the Hamas. They put you in the basement of the home, and they make you live there for 50 years. And every time you try to come out and you make a commotion, they go down there and they beat you up. Okay? And they go around, they say, this is our house, we're the new neighbors and everything. The original owners, you're living in the basement. One day you escape. Okay? You escape and you come out, you attack the owners and maybe you break a few things here and there. And what do the owners do? These terrorist Mexicans. We have the right to defend ourselves. We were just minding our own business. They had their basement to live in. We were just contextualize. Okay? What would you do in that situation? So when they tell you, will you condemn Hamas? Tell them, will you condemn 100 years of genocide and ethnic cleansing? And go and read that book by Ilan Pappé. Read the village by village detailed commentary in how Palestinians were killed, burned alive, tortured, raped, traumatized, turned into refugees. 400 villages. And say, will you condemn that? Will you condemn what happened at Dir Yassin? Will you condemn what happened at Haifa? Will you condemn how Tel Aviv became an actual city through all the carnage and bloodshed that it caused? Will you condemn that? Turn it back on them. You don't have to be on defense. You can be on... This is a case you need to be on offense. If you know your history, okay? They're the ones who should be playing defense, not you.
I don't know if I missed this. When did the Jews start being supported by the British? When they were being
From the get-go. British come in, they take the land in 1917 as a part of the British Mandate because the Ottoman Empire falls. Now, what some historians talk about is that the Jews actually helped the British in a lot of their espionage against the Ottoman Empire. And this was a part of quid pro quo. Okay? The Jews helped the British take Palestine. The Jews helped the British defeat the Ottomans. That's what they didn't want Palestine. They just wanted to defeat the Ottomans. So the British, in turn, make a promise to the Jews, quid pro quo. Now we're going to give it to you. Okay? You helped us defeat our enemy. Now we're going to give you this land. That's what the Balfour Declaration was all about. So from the get-go, when that happened, 1917, boats and boats and boats of Jews started coming into Palestine. And Zionism was just starting to pick up at that time. All Jews didn't even know about it yet. But many of them did. And the ones who did, the British, they were like, hey, you want to come to Palestine? In reality, they just wanted to get rid of them. Back.
So I'm curious what the role of evangelical Christians.
What's the role of evangelical Christians? Evangelical Christians, like Lloyd George, who in Parliament in 1917, British parliamentary member, very pro-Zionist, actually helped the Balfour Declaration go along and everything like that, was a Christian evangelical. Okay? Christian evangelicals believe that Jesus is not coming back until that whole land is Jewish. Here's what's so weird about this. They believe once he comes back, all the Jews are going to be destroyed. This is such a weird symbiosis. It's like if you're a Christian evangelical and a Zionist, you're like shaking hands with the Zionist, and then you're like smirking. Yeah, we're going to give you the land, we're going to give you the land. Then you're going to die. I mean, that's what it's like. That's really what they believe. But they believe that Christ is not coming back, and when they say Christ, they mean God. Okay? Until the Jews own all of them. And that's a biblical interpretation that not every Christian holds. Follow up?
Yeah, so in that same vein, do you think that Zionism would have the traction that it does now had it not been for the role of evangelical Christians?
I don't think it would have the traction it has now. I think the evangelicals played a very important role, especially America, because essentially after the UN partitioned Palestine, giving more than 50% to the Zionists, and the British backed out, America essentially took their spot. Okay? America took the spot of the British. And American evangelical lobbying has always been a very strong component of American politics. So even though they may not say it outright, okay, a lot of American evangelicals religiously support Zionism. They're not Jews. Remember, Zionism is not necessarily a Jewish thing. It's the idea that all the land of Palestine, not just Palestine, by the way, true Zionism, you know what true Zionism entails? True what?
It's the whole sham.
All of Canaan, all of Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, becoming a massive Jewish state. And a lot of Christians support that.
Would you agree that the UN partition was an attempt for a two-state solution?
It was an attempt for a two-state solution. Yeah, I do think. But here's what the records show. The Zionists at that time did not care about the amount of land given to them. Actually, they didn't care, because from the get-go, their plan was just to take everything. What they cared about was international recognition. That's what they cared about. They could have been given 30%. They would have been just as happy. But 30% internationally recognized was international recognition. And by the way, countries like, you can go back and read about countries like Guatemala, Liberia. So many of the countries in the UN at that time that voted for the partition went back and said, we were forced by America. Our hand was twisted. Funding or aid or pressure or political pressure, or they had some dirt on a politician or something like that, their hand was twisted, and they came back and reported, we were forced to vote this way. We got to pray over. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله فاستغفروه إنه كان غفورا. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give the Palestinians ease and patience. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them relief. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala show the world the truth of the oppression and wrong that is happening. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them strength. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala restore their ability, their dignity, their land. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of the land back to its rightful owners. Oh Allah, protect the Palestinians. Oh Allah, give them patience, give them ease, give them comfort. Unite the Muslims, oh Allah, unite the Ummah. Bring us together to help our brothers and sisters in this land and to remove oppression. Oh Allah, there is no God but you. There is no power but your power. There's no ability but your ability. You can do everything without anything. Everything can do nothing without you. Your mercy encompasses everything, and we are a thing, and the Palestinians are a thing. Oh Allah, let your mercy encompass us. Let your mercy encompass them. Oh Allah, destroy their enemies. Oh Allah, bring back their dignity. Oh Allah, give them confidence, give them strength, and give them patience. Ameen.